Amen. Well, happy Easter. Thrilled that you're here with us, and thankful for those that came at 8:30 that left a few spaces open for us. As people come in, feel free to give them your spot. If you're a volunteer, as people come in, feel free to stand against the wall, but we're good. I've never been able to speak to this section, so I really just want to face the 8 of you the entire time. Got a lot of close friends in this section, but then they'll write me emails like, oh, you were speaking just to me and not the whole crowd. So here's the thing. There are things in our lives that are constantly coming to an end. And there are some endings in our lives that make us really happy. When a difficult season of life comes to a conclusion, when a massive debt is finally paid off, when a time of unemployment comes to a close. There are endings that we celebrate. There are endings that we're thrilled with. If you're a CPA on April 15th, you're going to, clap and be so grateful. But I know so many of my accountant friends, because I don't know how it works for the corporate world, they're like, oh, Ben, you don't understand. April 15th is just something for individuals. I've got a March deadline and a June deadline and a November. Sorry, choose a different profession. Find some joy along the way. But when things are over, and they're happy things, we celebrate. We are so glad. We say to our spouses, our friend, to our small group, I am so glad that is done. When we search for a job and that search is over, of course, it just begins a whole new set of problems for us. But there are other kinds of things that we built our lives on. And every one of us in this room has built our life on something or some things. And here's what we have all built our lives on. We've set our hope on one of two things, something that will deliver us, we think, no matter what comes our way, and something that will never go away. So every one of us in this room, if you if you think about it logically for a moment, you're building your life on a couple of assumptions, whatever those things are that you're like, I've got to have that, and I've got to have that. Whatever you're setting your hopes on are two things in mind. One, that they must be able to deliver you whatever comes your way. And number two, it's the assumption that they will always be there. But when these things come to an end, it feels a bit like we're finished too, doesn't it? It just feels a little bit. So here's what I'm going to ask you just to get started today. Is there anything in your life that has just come to an end or is on the brink of being finished? Is there anything in your life that has just come to an end or is on the brink of being finished? And in a room this size, there are all kinds of examples. There are so many things. In this room, there are people going through divorces. In this room, there are people whose family members are on the brink of death. In this room, there are people who don't know if they'll have a job when they show up at the office tomorrow. In this room, there are people that have just ended relationships this weekend. And that's why you're here at church. She told you if you would come to church, she might get back with you. She's teasing you, all right? She is just teasing you. But that's where we are in life. And here's the story for some of us, that the things that we thought would last forever, and they came to a conclusion, and therefore we're still existing, but it's just a mere existence. We really don't have much to live for. There was perhaps a spouse who promised you forever before your friends and family, but now they're saying that actually wasn't true. Maybe you moved to San Francisco for an incredible job opportunity, and truth be told, from day one, you loved your job, you loved your team, and you loved the company, and you simultaneously fell in love with living in this amazing city. But the job has been removed from you, and now it looks like there's a great likelihood that you will have to leave the city that you've come to love as well. What do you do? Some of you once had this deeply held belief that there was a good God who had a plan and a purpose for your life. But can we just be honest this morning? Things didn't go so well from that moment to this moment. You saw too much. You've experienced too much pain. Your circumstances were telling you either there is no God, or if there is a God, he's not for you. And while you're no longer convinced of the beliefs you once held very dear, you sure do miss living with hope. Well, if you're anywhere along the spectrum of having just come out of something that's finished in your life or something that's on the brink of being done in your life, I just want you to know that you have a lot in common with Jesus' followers that first Easter weekend. Maybe more in common than you knew walking into this room. And so I want to tell you a little bit about their story that first Easter weekend. And sometimes we think of people in the Bible as having amazing faith, and we don't seem to match up. Well, I want to tell you that you have more in common with these guys that first Easter weekend on this Easter weekend in 2016 than you might have ever could have imagined. And so these guys, they had seen Jesus do some amazing things. They had seen Jesus heal the blind. They had seen Jesus bring movement back to those who were paralyzed. They had seen Jesus helped the cripple learn to be able to walk and jump and run. They had seen all of these things. They saw Jesus raise dead men back to life. So they had seen a few things. They heard Jesus teach with an authority that they had never heard any teacher or prophet speak with. They saw Jesus elevate the value of women and children in a culture, if you know anything about the culture of the day, the culture that primarily didn't do that kind of thing. So they saw Jesus do a ton. And these were the men, initially 12 of them, who were uttered an invitation from Jesus to come and follow me. And the text early on in the gospel says they left everything and went. They didn't just diversify their portfolio. They pushed all of the chips to the middle of the table and said, we'll go with you wherever you're going. Maybe they hated being fishermen. Maybe they thought their family was a drag. But whatever it was, they left their profession. They left all of their family. They left what they had known as home. And they went on this adventure with Jesus. And they were pushing all of their chips in. They're all in. And they're saying to him, we are hanging our lives on this hope. We are staking our future on the reality that you have pronounced. Until one Friday comes. And on this particular Friday, when Jesus and his movement seemed to come to a halt, John records these words. John, the disciple, known as the one whom Jesus loved, records these 3 words as the last thing Jesus said. It's actually one word in the Greek language, tetelestai. But the 3 words translated in English that Jesus said, according to John, as he was being crucified, were these 3 words: it is finished. And Jesus' first followers thought he was absolutely telling the truth. They thought it was finished. They thought their hopes had been snuffed out. They thought what they had given themselves to was no longer a possibility. And what I want to do the rest of our time this morning is let you know what they thought Jesus meant by it is finished and what Jesus actually meant by it is finished. And wherever you're at this morning, not a faith person, like someone bribed you with brunch, awesome, take them up on it. Get 2 orange juices when you're there. I can't tell you get 2 of other things because then they're like, oh, Pastor, why did you? But I know some of you will. Just be careful out there, okay? It's early. It's still early. And I should change the subject. Maybe you're here because you do the Easter thing. Like, this is your thing. And so, you don't put, those of you that just show up at Easter, you don't put any pressure on a pastor at all. There's no pressure at all. Like, Pilgreen, you got one shot. Give it your best because you won't see them for another 52 weeks. And so no pressure. I haven't prayed at all going to today. I slept like a baby and thrilled that you are here. But here's what I think we all owe to ourselves. We need to understand what actually was behind the phrase, it is finished. Because some of us today, even though we're still alive, even though there's breath in our lungs and our hearts are still beating, because a relationship ended, because where we thought we were going to be employed ended, because our financial situation failed, whatever the case may be, there's things in all of our lives where it's going, hey, this looks like it's done. And even though we're existing, we're merely existing because we think everything we had hoped for, everything we thought would deliver us or would be around forever, we've either realized one of 2 things or both, that it couldn't deliver in every situation or that it didn't last. And so what I want to do with our time this morning, looking at initially a text, Luke 24, if you have a Bible. If you need a Bible, just raise your hands and we'll get one handed to you. Keep your hands up so you can follow along. Luke chapter 24 is where I want to begin, and you can keep your place there. We'll come back to it a number of times, and we'll also be in John chapter 20. For those of you who, when you're taking a road trip, you need to know where you're going to end up. You need to know every stop along the way. We got some hands up here at the front. We could throw Bibles, but, eyes get... Luke chapter 24 is where we'll be. We'll also be in John chapter 20 this morning. But what I want to let you know is how I can absolutely convince you that Jesus' first followers thought when the crucifixion happened and he uttered those words, it is finished, they totally believed that he was telling the truth, but they didn't understand what the it was referring to. Okay? And so we'll show up in Luke 24 in just a moment. But initially you have women. So Jesus is crucified on a Friday, and I think you guys probably know that. Good Friday, it's what we celebrate. Nothing good about it on that particular day. And on Saturday, it's the Sabbath. And if you know anything about Jewish custom and observance of the Sabbath, they couldn't do anything on Saturday with the body of Jesus. And they really couldn't do any work on Saturday. I know none of you have nervous energy when you're not allowed to do anything, right? Right? And so on the Sabbath, right, there are no iPhones, but even if there had been, they could not look up articles on their phone. They could not pass the time in that way. They would not be going places. They would not be just, they were limited how far they could walk. And so they just had this, what I can imagine is nervous, anxious energy. But on Sunday, the first thing that happens is Easter Sunday, the ladies who had followed Jesus and saw where he had been laid in the tomb, they go to the tomb with spices to anoint his body, because that's what you do to a body that's finished. That's what you do to a body which has had all of its life spill out of it. And so they go there. But when they go there, they realize the tomb is empty. More about that in a minute. And they come back to tell the disciples. And you know the disciples were great faith, right? They had amazing faith. Here's what happens in 24, 10, and 11. Here are the ladies. It's always the ladies leading the way, right, women? Ladies, there was a great moment for you to seize there. And guys, you better open your mouth too. It's always the ladies leading the way, right? Come on. 10 and 11. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. So if you're in the space this morning, and you're just not sure this is a thing yet, it's a bit fairy tale-ish for you, it's a bit too good to be true, you have a whole lot in common with Jesus' 11 disciples. And they saw Jesus do a lot more than you've seen, at least with your physical eyes. They saw the healings. They saw the way he elevated women and children. They saw him raise people from the dead. They saw him serve and give his life away. They saw all of that. And it's Easter morning there, and the ladies tell them the tomb is empty, and they're like, fairy tale. Like, we wish that was true. One of the things, all of us when we were kids, we're no longer into kind of fairy tales. You might like fiction, but you don't necessarily believe that it's true. But when we're kids, we believe that anything's possible. We believe that anything's possible. And we're into these fairy tales. We're like, man, that would be amazing. It's true. Tim Keller, who pastors in New York, he says, even if you can't yet believe in the resurrection, you should really wish that it were true. Even if that's where you are. Like, I don't have the belief yet, but you should really, if you're not in that place of belief, you should really want it to be true anyway, because of what the implications are, because of what it brings to bear. But the disciples on this day believe that it's fairy tale. And so the ladies thought Jesus was finished. That's why they're going to anoint his body, because that's what you do with bodies that are finished. The disciples thought the thing was a fairy tale, so they knew that it was all finished. And this is Easter. I think we have a lot of misconceptions about what that first Easter was like. It wasn't like there was no sunrise service for the disciples and Jesus, okay? There was no like, hey, Jesus, we're wearing our best, and we come with high anticipation. There was none of that. And then in Luke 24:21, you see there are a couple of disciples that also think it's finished. They are leaving Jerusalem on Sunday, Easter Sunday, and they are headed to a village called Emmaus. And on their path, while they're walking there, Jesus comes into their midst, but he keeps them from recognizing him. I don't know if he's got like glasses on this time. I don't know if it's a mustache thing. I don't know how he does it, but he keeps himself from being recognized. And they say to him, as he inquires about the weekend, they say to Jesus, just picture this, are you the only one around here who doesn't know what's happened? Think about that. What rises up in you if you're anything like your pastor when someone acts like you don't know what's going on? Right? The team's like, hey, like the team's telling you how the software works, and you're like, yeah, I wrote it, right? Or telling you what we do in terms of our marketing team, you're like, yeah, my idea. Like the flip charts, me. So they're telling Jesus, are you the only full, clueless one around here who has no idea what's happened? Now, they don't know it's Jesus, so keep that in mind. He's playing dumb. And here's what they say about their belief that it was all finished in verse 21. They say to Jesus, but we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things happened. So do you see in these three instances that these three groups of people think that it's done? Because Jesus is finished, they are finished. So you have the ladies coming to anoint a dead body, because that's what you do with a dead body. You have the disciples not buying the fairy tale that's too good to be true. And you have these two that have left Jerusalem. Can you imagine their conversations? Hey, what are we going to do now? They said, we had hoped, meaning we used to have hope, but that hope is finished, and it feels a bit like we're finished too. What do you do in that moment? So when Jesus uttered his final words, it is finished, everyone thought he was telling the truth. But they defined, or at least they thought he was defining the word it in a different way than he actually was. Now turn over to John 20, just one book to the right. John 20, and stand with me. I want us to read 3 verses that change everything for the disciples. Because here's the question we have to ask. How do you go from these women coming to anoint a dead body, the disciples not believing a fairy tale, these 2 guys headed to Emmaus thinking it was all finished? How do you go from that to these guys leading the movement forward, so much so that we would be in a really expensive space in a basement in downtown San Francisco talking about it a couple thousand years later? How do you get there? Is it a straight line? John 20, 19 through 21. It's Easter still, okay? On the evening, so it's late Easter. On the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples were glad. That seems like a small word, right? They were glad. Oh, thanks for coming back. We'll get to the meaning of that in a moment. They were glad when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you." You may be seated. So it is finished, were the last words John records Jesus saying before his death. And the first words recorded by John after his resurrection to his disciples are these words, "Peace be with you." Couldn't Jesus have come up with something a little more clever? Like, "Did you miss me? I'm back. That was a rough 48 hours." I mean, right? Couldn't he have come up with something else? Why does he choose this language? Why does he say, "Peace be with you" twice in a span of 3 verses? You see, oftentimes, friends, we think that what we most need to change are our circumstances. And if you're in a tough spot of something that you wish wasn't over in your life, if you wish it was back or if it had never ended, then I hurt with you and I hurt for you. But what we think we most need is for our circumstances to change. But Jesus knew they didn't most need their circumstances to change. He knew that he was able to bring peace into the midst of their circumstances. So he says, "Peace with you." He says this because they had known no peace. They are locked in a room for fear of the Jews. What are they fearing from the Jews? They're fearing that the Jewish establishment that crucified Jesus might come after them next. So they have the door locked. Now, how Jesus gets in, I don't know if he did the coat hanger thing. Does that still work, by the way? The credit card thing? But he comes into the space where they are. He stands among them, and this is what he wants to say first. "Peace be with you." They had only known fear, angst, anxiety, depression, hopelessness. They had a lot of questions, but they had 0 answers. And Jesus steps up and he says, "Peace be with you." Anyone looking for peace today? You came in thinking to this phase of your life, like if the job thing would change, if the relationship would change, if my kids would get back on track, if we could have this financial windfall, if I hit my quota, if the numbers come up, if we get to take this trip, if we get to stay in this city, or if we get to move to another city, then I will have it made. That's what I'm setting my hopes on. And Jesus goes, "Hey, I want to give you peace in the midst of circumstantial whatevers, because circumstances aren't something you can hang your hat on, but you can hang your hat on me." So he says, "Peace be with you." And then Jesus shows them his hands and his side. What is he doing? He's letting them know it is really me. And it is really the me who was crucified. But I know a couple of days ago, you guys thought because of this that death had finished me. But I'm here today to tell you that I have done away with death. Not physical death, spiritual death. The death that actually matters the most. I've done away with it. That's what I'm doing here. That's why I went through this. That's why I allowed this to happen. It's why I didn't come down from the cross, because I had to endure that for the sake of your sin, but also to overcome death once and for all. That's what I've done. And then it says they were glad to see him. Come on, guys. Can't you come up with something better than the English translation than glad to see you? Luke 24:41. Listen to how Luke records the response. I think it's a little more passionate and emotional. Luke says, "While they still disbelieved for joy and were marveling, he said to them, 'Have you anything here to eat?'" They disbelieved for joy. What does that mean? It means they were overjoyed at seeing Jesus' resurrected body, but it still was almost too good to be true for them. And I love Jesus, like, so they're like mouths wide open, they're pointing, they're whispering to each other. Remember, there's 12, like 11, well, okay, there's 11 of them at this time, and there's 11 of them in Jesus, and so he's talking, and then you can imagine they're having these side conversations about, can you believe? And Jesus is like, hey, does anybody have breakfast? It's been a couple of days since I've eaten. Does anybody have some food? He just wants to the commentators say he just wants to get back into helping them realize that this is actually him. This isn't a spirit. It isn't a ghost. This is the bodily, resurrected body of Jesus. It is Jesus. And that's what he's wanting them to say. So he shows them his hands and his feet, and then he does something incredible. They now know that Jesus isn't finished, but then he gives them some wording to let them know that they aren't finished either. In fact, what they thought was finished about their future, he's telling them it's really just getting started, fellas. And he says this, in the same way that the Father has sent me to do what you've now seen me come and do, I am sending you. So he's not just saying, hey, I'm back and I'm the big deal, although he is. He's saying, I'm back and I'm going to give you a plan, I'm going to give you a purpose, and I'm going to give you a mission, and your life is not going to be lived in vain. The resurrection doesn't just change the fact that I'm alive. It's going to bring a life to you that's going to expand around the globe. And yes, you cowards in the locked room are going to be responsible for it. It's crazy to me that Jesus trusted people like this. He blew every leadership principle we know, didn't he? Right? You have an intern so that you can see, can they handle it in the real world? Right? They come for the summer, they get their degree, and based on how they do with you, like, okay, you can start at this other low-level thing. And Jesus is like, hey, I know you guys are cowards, but here you go. Take this thing forward. Here's the mission. Here's the keys. Really? The question, of course, is how do they go from being locked in a room to being responsible for spreading the movement of Jesus forward, so much so that we would gather at 10 a.m. on Easter Sunday in 2016 in the middle of San Francisco and tell the story? Only one thing changed. Now, some of us in this room say that if we saw what the disciples saw, we would have faith too. Anybody? Right? If I had a dead person on the stage, or let's just go with a blind person. We'll work from there. A blind person on the stage, Jesus comes in and heals them. I think most of you are going, I'm in. But friends, that wasn't enough for the disciples. If Lazarus is dead when Jesus shows up, which will make for a really awkward Sunday until Jesus showed up, and Jesus brings him back to life, I think you go, Ben, if I see that, I am in. They saw that. If you saw the way that Jesus died, you would go, I'm in. For someone who is perfect and sinless to be accused and to stay there, though he had the power to bring himself off the cross, if he did that, I'm in. But you need to know that every single one of those things were seen by the disciples. Everything was heard by the disciples, and none of those things were enough to keep them from being fearful cowards locked in a room. One thing, friends, there is nothing else in all of history that you can point to and go, hey, that's the thing. There's only one. It's the fact that they saw a dead man, their Savior, come back to life and conquer sin and death and the grave, and that's it. There's nothing else. Now listen, I'm not a pastor going, hey, nothing else in the scriptures is important. Jesus taught some amazing things. He did some amazing things, but none of those amazing things were the thing. This is the thing that changed absolutely everything. Otherwise, we would not be here this morning. The movement never would have got started. How do you go from being full of fear to full of faith? How do you go from being super anxious to full of peace? How do you go from fearing for your life to willingly giving your life? It's because you become convinced, because you've seen something that's changed everything. And that's the whole idea that's going on with Jesus. He's like, as the Father sent me, I'm sending you, because I'm not finished, period. I'm not finished with you, period. I've got a movement. And I don't know if you're in the room this morning, you're like, man, okay, maybe Jesus is still alive, whatever, but I feel like I'm finished. Here's what Jesus is doing. What does he mean when he says it is finished? If he doesn't mean that the good things are coming to an end, what does he mean? Here's what he means. He means all of the things that you thought would put an end to you. All of the things that seem to dominate your existence, your present and your future existence, those are the things that I'm putting to an end. Those are the things that I'm removing from your life from having the last word. Some of us this morning, because of what has ended in our lives, we think that that thing or that group of people or that person got to have the last word. But I'm here to tell you, your divorce doesn't get the last word. You spent time in prison, so what? That doesn't get to sentence you forever. Depression seems to mark your life from here until the end of it. And I just want to tell you, it doesn't get the final say-so. Your miscarriage doesn't get to define your family. Your sexual identity doesn't get to define who you are forever. Your The fact that you think shame gets the last laugh over your life, I want to tell you that it doesn't. The disease that your mother or father are struggling with, and you know that they're on the brink of death, that may happen. We will mourn with you, but that doesn't get to say what's final. Death doesn't get to write the last chapter in your life, and sin doesn't get to reign over you forever. It's time for us to quit acting like the resurrection is trumped by all of these things in our lives. The resurrection is the trump card. It overcomes pain, and it overcomes death, and it overcomes sin, and it overcomes depression, and it overcomes the fact that someone who was supposed to love you actually ended up abusing you in some way. That doesn't get to write your last chapter. So let's just go, okay, Jesus, I want in on this resurrection thing. I need something that would give me hope, not something in vain. I don't need a fairy tale, but if this reality exists, then it's time for me to lean into it. The stuff you thought had finished you, the good stuff that you thought was over, the disciples thought the good stuff was done. Some of you think the good stuff is over, and so you're sort of figuring out how to just get on with life. And what I want to say is that we are trying to remake our lives when Jesus is seeking to resurrect our lives. Right? We're trying to figure out what new thing can we get into, right? I'm going to change careers. That can be okay. I'm going to change relationships. That can be okay. I'm going to change cities. Those things can be okay, but we're trying to make the best with something we think we have to work with, and Jesus is going, hey, let's just bring it back to life and act like that stuff isn't the final say-so. So for you, what is it that seemingly has finished you? What have you lost? What has ended? And for some of us, it has ended in this season. Others of us, it's been a couple of decades. And can we just be honest? There are things that end in our lives, and because of that, we're never the same again. One day, Lazarus had died, and Jesus shows up, it seems like late. And Martha says to Jesus about Lazarus, if you had only come sooner, he would still be alive. And Jesus is like, you're right. Sorry, I can't do anything about this. No, he didn't say that. Here's what Jesus said to Martha and what he wants to say to you. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. And then he gives Martha this pointed question that I want to ask you this morning. Do you believe this? I know you're ready for me to move on. I don't have any jokes. Do you believe this? It is finished. The resurrection is telling us that the things we thought would never be finished actually are going to be finished. The bad stuff, the pain, sin, death. But the good stuff we thought was over is really just getting started. That's what the resurrection is saying to us. And friends, you have to know, like, the resurrection isn't one of our things as Christians, it's our thing. Teachings of Jesus are amazing, the miracles, the way he treated people, the way he loved, the way he associated with sinners that the religious elite thought that he should have never spent time with. Those things are incredible, but those things aren't the thing. The thing is resurrection, and it's this thing that's the thing that changes absolutely everything. Everything. And you know what? Like, we can be casual about a lot of things in life. If you're a passionate person, would you just raise your hand? Obviously, the people who are sleeping aren't so passionate, but I can't stand people who are casual about things. I want everything in life to be like it's the best or the worst. It doesn't matter if it's a TV show, a movie, where we eat lunch. I mean, but you can be casual about some things, right? Like, I guess you can be casual about the Giants baseball team. It shouldn't be because it's an even year, but you can. You could be casual about the weather here in San Francisco. It's been amazing lately. But you can be casual about that. You can be casual about where you eat today. Do you know where you're eating today? 1, 2, 3, tell it to me. 1, 2, 3. All right, so you guys are fasting for Easter for the most part, which is amazing. Get into heaven some way. I mean, whatever. Like, Jesus, Easter, no food. I guess you could even be casual about who our next president will be. But we can't be casual about Jesus and his resurrection claim. No matter what your IQ is, you can't intellectually honestly go, hey, it really doesn't matter whether he did or didn't, so what? You've not been left with that option. If the resurrection took place, it changes everything. If it did not take place, it really changes nothing. And perhaps we're wasting our time this morning. Perhaps it was a waste of time for me and a team to move here to start this church a few years ago. We're not here to figure out how to be good. We're not here simply to have community, though. I hope you find that here at Epic. And I realize we're all in process, but at the end of the day, if we can't bring our minds and hearts around the idea of resurrection, Paul told the Corinthians everything else falls apart. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 14, here are a couple things Paul said. He's writing about how not only has Jesus been raised from the dead, but we will be resurrected as well, which is a pretty fascinating thing. He says in verse 14, if Christ has not been raised, like if it really didn't happen, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. He's saying everything rises and falls on the resurrection. And then in verse 19, the same chapter, he says, if in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are of all people most to be pitied. We are fools if there's no resurrection. I'm giving you false hope week in and week out here if there's no resurrection. You have nothing to stake your life on if there is no resurrection. Oh, but if there is resurrection, then the stuff that has pained you, the stuff that has disappointed you, the addictions, the abuse, the relational things that have just broken your heart, all of those things don't get to have the final say-so. And that's what we have to know. And I'm not asking you to live with resurrection power so that you have a crutch to hang on to, as some have mentioned. I'm asking you to live with resurrection power because that's the invitation from Jesus. Let's don't make what he did on the cross and what he did Easter Sunday, let's not make that be in vain. Let's lean into it. But that hope is what we need. And that hope is what is there. When I was 25 and my mother was 46 and she passed away, it was painful. But I needed to know that that wasn't the end of her story, and it's not the end of my story. I know some of you have lost parents, and some of you are close to that, and I just want to say, hey, lean into hope, not without pain, but with a deep belief that that's not the last chapter. There's a little girl that lives in our house now, and she went through enough where she grew up to think this is the end of the story. She's now hearing about a Savior who has a different ending in mind. And there are men and women in this church, all throughout our church, who thought something from the past had to dictate them forever. It's why one of our values here is that because of the grace of Jesus, and this morning I'll say because of the resurrection, death and resurrection of Jesus, friend, your past doesn't have to dictate your future. It is finished. And what I want to ask you, if you're not a Christian this morning, is would you today, for the first time in your life, be willing to stake your life, both now and for eternity, on the resurrection of Jesus? Would you be willing to step across that line of faith and go, as the centurion did when he watched Jesus die, truly you are the Son of God? And if you are a Christian, I want to make sure we know what we're talking about, what definition we're using this morning. I am not asking you with that, hey, are you a Christian? Did you grow up in the church? I'm not asking you to tell me how you grew up Catholic or Baptist or Presbyterian. That's not what I'm about this morning. I'm asking you, have you ever made this faith decision in your heart and in your mind and with your life to go, Jesus, I'm staking my hope now and my hope forever on your resurrection? That's what it means to be a follower of Christ. The movement would have died without the resurrection. It was on its way out just 48 hours in, was it not? 2 that were on their way to Emmaus, these others that were locked in a room. Movement was done. But it really just got started. Why? Because the resurrection happened. But if you're a Christian in the room, I've got to ask ourselves a question. Why do we keep acting like the struggles we face have more power than the resurrection power? And I'm raising my hand with you. I'm in that boat. Why do we come up against something that, yes, it's daunting, it is fearful, it is dreadful, it's challenging, it is difficult. But why do we keep addressing things in our lives as though they get the final say? They have the last word. When resurrection not only lives in Jesus, but his resurrection power lives in us. Paul said in Romans 8:11, what did he say? He's like, man, if the Spirit of God lives in you, then the Spirit who raised Jesus from the dead will give life to your mortal bodies as well. And here's the thing. Your future in this earthly life and in the life to come is completely based on whether the resurrection happened and whether you place your faith there. Would you bow your heads with me this morning? Every one of you should have a communication card. And if not, that's cool. You can actually get your phone out for this. I want to know if you're walked into a room, not so sure, kind of like the disciples started their Easter morning. But after what you've heard and what you've seen and what's been spoken to you, if you're ready to stake your life, your hope on Jesus and his resurrection for the forgiveness of your sins and for life eternal with Jesus in heaven, just on your card, but you just write, you can check a box like I'm interested in knowing more about Christ or giving my life to Christ, or you can even write on there, I am putting my hope in his resurrection. You can even email me right now in this moment if you don't have a communication card. I got one more service to do, but then I'll get back to you. Just ben@epicsf.com. We just say, hey, today I'm ready. Some of you are my friends in this room that I know haven't crossed that line. Been thinking about you a lot. Others of you I've never met, but I know you're dealing with, like, is this the deal? If it is, it means everything. It means everything. And if not, it really means nothing. Where you stand today, and Christian, what about you? What is it that you're facing? And I know it's painful, but is there something that you're looking at in your own life and going, that is the trump card? Have you forgotten the power of the resurrection? Have you forgotten what Jesus meant when he said, it is finished? It's time to lean in with hope and faith. And Jesus, we just ask today that you would make these truths alive in our heart. Jesus, you know we don't have the ability to time travel back to this moment that we read about today. We don't have the ability to be with the disciples in a room that's locked and have you come and say, guys, death didn't finish me. I finished death. We don't get to see that with our physical eyes, but give us eyes of faith. And Jesus, you know the least likely person or people in this room, when they came in to say, hey, I'm in, I pray that even for them, they would know that they're not too far gone. They're not too finished, even with their doubts. Give them the faith to trust you in this moment. In your name, Lord. Amen.